I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Newburyport Public Schools School Committee for Monday, November 3rd at 2014. Mrs. Kennedy, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Menon?
Here.
Mr. Cole? Absent. Ms. Sweeney?
Present.
Mayor Holliday?
Present.
Mr. DeCampa?
Here.
Ms. McCarthy?
Here.
Mr. Lukens?
Here.
One absent.
Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Good evening. This brings us to our public comment section. If there's anyone who would like to address this committee with an issue or comment, please raise your hand. You'll be recognized, and then state your name and address, and try to keep your comments to 2 minutes or under. Is there anyone that has a comment at this time?
Colleen McElhenney, address is 197 High Street, Newburyport. And I think most of the issues that we have to talk about are in the discussion by Mr. Manning and Mr. Cantor, members of the subcommittee on the policy, specifically on building use. But I am present and several members of youth basketball and also one of the youth high school basketball coaches and the athletic director. We're all here to talk about a request to use the Bressingham School on weekends, to use the Bressingham school gym specifically. So our programs are growing. We're trying to be much more inclusive of all of the youth in Newburyport to really make basketball a thriving, vibrant sport in Newburyport. And we've added several teams, both on the girls' side of the league and the boys' side this year, which is great. But because of it, we are bursting at the seams, and we absolutely need to be able to access any and all available gym space that we can in order to accommodate all of the youngsters that want to play. So we're asking for approval to use the Bressingham gym on Saturdays and also on Sundays from basically for the winter season. And we've specifically asked for 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Saturdays. We initially had requested 12 noon to 6:30 p.m. on Sundays, but we understand that there's some discussion about whether or not that would be a phone call instead. But we obviously would like to be in there earlier, but we understand at 1 o'clock will probably be the time that we would be allowed, if at all. So that is our request. There was also a discussion or request to address the issue of using facilities before 1 o'clock, but we understand that may not be something that is resolved this evening, but it is definitely something that is of interest to youth basketball, again, in order to maximize the gym space that we have. And we have several volunteers who are involved in our leagues, who have busy schedules as well, so having additional time available, it's not just the total hours available, but also the times of day available, helps us to accommodate everybody's schedules and make sure that we have the best programs. So.
Thank you. Any other comment? Thank you. Consent agenda. Do we have warrants, Mr.
You
Menon?
have warrants. I move the following named bills of the Newburyport Public Schools amounting in the aggregate to $36,503.82 be approved and forwarded to the city auditor for payment. There are no conflicts on this.
Second?
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
We have another warrant. This one also has no conflicts. I move that the following named bills of the Newburyport Public Schools amounting in the aggregate to $285,836.93 be approved and forwarded to the city auditor for payment. Again, they have no conflicts.
Second?
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. I'd like to address the Newburyport School Committee Business Meeting minutes for Monday, October 20th. Could I hear a motion?
So moved.
Discussion, comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thanks, motion carries. Our Newburyport rep was not able to be with us this evening, so we're gonna skip over that to, there has been a request by Mr. Menon to move up the report from the policy committee so that we can address the issue of the basketball. So, Mr. Menon, could
Sure.
you?
I'll extract this. I'll go into a little greater depth in the, of the policy meeting that we had last Thursday, sort of had last Thursday. But one of the issues that we were asked to take a look at in light of time constraints was the request for the Youth Basketball League to use the new elementary school, the Bresnahan gym, on the weekends. And as we weren't able to discuss this until our meeting on Thursday, and as we began to discuss it, it looked to us like there were a lot of questions that we had about the policy itself, and aligning the policy with using some of the other city facilities, and bringing the policy up to date so that, for example, we needed to, there are events that are happening that we never would have imagined happening, and our policies just don't cover them. In some of the road races, you've seen tents springing up on our front lawns. We are trying to cover the damage to those lawns out of what the custodians are able to do. So we really need to really tear the policy down and take a look at it. In the interest of not delaying the Youth Basketball League, which needs to have an answer for scheduling, it is the recommendation of the policy committee that let me just read this out. It's a recommendation of the policy committee to the full school committee that tonight the school committee approve the application of the Youth Basketball League to use the facilities at the new elementary school, the Bresnahan, on weekends. We ask them to avoid scheduling before 1 p.m. on Sunday. If they are not able to do that, they would need to come back to us to have a discussion, and that would probably at that point push us to deal with that element in the policy right now, as opposed to holding off and trying to do it as a larger package. And that we would operate under the policies that were in place last year, and if we were to change the policy while their league is going on, we would essentially hold them harmless for this year. That we'll operate this year as we did last year, but that we go ahead and approve so that they can get the schedule out. So that's the recommendation of the policy subcommittee based on our meeting on Thursday.
Can you go over the hours again on Saturday and Sunday,
I
what you're
would-
proposing?
We're suggesting, what time do you guys start? I mean, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about when you start on Saturdays now. The 1 p.m. prescription doesn't
Well, I
occur on
understand that
Saturday.
they want the gym from 8:30 to 6.
That's what they have been using traditionally.
And then Sunday, are they requesting morning time?
We are suggesting at this point that they put together a schedule and see if it works without starting before 1.
Okay.
If that doesn't work, then they need to come back to us. We've had conversations going off and on, and I certainly would offer them an opportunity to share their thoughts on whether that's feasible or viable. But that's what our recommendation was coming out of policy. So I'm, if you,
Sorry, just to clarify, it was 8 a.m. on Saturday to
Oh,
6 p.m. and
yeah.
Sunday we were requesting go until 6:30 p.m. So starting at 1 is your recommendation. You had asked for noon, but at Perez.
Yeah, one of the things that I will have to check is to make sure that we can get consistent custodial coverage for those hours.
I did check with Steve Burkholm, and he said that he did not foresee that being a problem.
Okay, good.
And all of this is contingent on them having coverage for us. We would then go back with the specific times. It may not be exactly 8 to 6 consistently. We would get back to them and say, here's our needs, and they would staff it accordingly.
Yeah, I think we should
Could
clarify.
could I back up for 1 second? Could you make a motion so we could have a discussion, Mr. Menon?
Sure.
And,
No, he didn't. Just the
no, he
recommendation of
didn't.
policy.
no,
No,
yeah.
please.
All right, let me make the motion. I move that the school committee, full school committee, approve the application of Youth Basketball League to use facilities at the Bresnahan on weekends, that we ask them to avoid scheduling before 1 p.m. on Sunday, and that we operate under the existing policies and practices and hold them harmless this season in the event we adopt new policies before their season ends.
Thank you. Could I hear a second?
Second.
Discussion. Thank you. Mr. DeCanter.
Yeah, I think what we need to be clear on here is that part of what the policy currently establishes is that this is subject to the approval of the principal. So the principals, even though the principals have been looking to us to say, hey, is it okay to use the space? And we're saying yes. They will be working with the principals, as they always have in any one of the facilities, to make sure the schedules, custodians are in place, and everything else is taken care of. So that part does not change. The autonomy of the principal in this situation continues to be an element of the policy.
Mayor?
Just a couple questions. So how many students are in the league?
Colleen, my name is Jeremiah Wallace, and I'm the president of the boys youth league. And this year, we've actually had we just wrapped up registration, so we have approximately 250 boys who are participating from grades 1 to 8. And that's been pretty consistently rising since we started about 10 years ago. We had about 250 last year. So
Is it just Newburyport students, or is it for the broad community? So
it's really for anybody who lives in the Newburyport town. We do occasionally have 1 or 2 kids that may come in from either the Triton region or West Newbury, but it's primarily, I would say, 98% Newburyport students.
and you have a girls' league too?
We do.
Good evening. Brian Haddon, president of the Newburyport Girls Association. Our program's grown this season alone by 20%. We're up to approximately 120 girls in our program.
That's great. So, before you had the Bresnahan School, where did you play?
Well, we use the Bresnahan, but
The
on
old gym? Right.
very limited capabilities. So right now, or prior to this year, with the Bresnahan being available, we utilize the NOC, the high school gyms, and the Bresnahan. We also utilize the Brown for practices primarily, and then for games we use the NOC and the high school on the weekends.
Cool.
So getting back to the time constraints, on Saturdays we would start at the NOC with our younger kids. We call them our D leaguers, the 3rd and 4th graders. We'd start at 7:30 in the morning, and we'd play games after that right up until about 5:30 to 6. Here at the high school, we coordinated with Coach Greg Dawes, who's not in attendance tonight, unfortunately. He would have his girls practice on Saturdays in the morning and run a clinic, and then we would do games from 1 o'clock until around 8 on Saturday evening. And the same for Sunday, the girls, I think, would use both the NOC and the high school gym from, I think it was 1 o'clock on until 7 or 8, Brian? So,
Well, now that the youth services is over at the Brown School, you certainly can use that gym too. And we would appreciate having more use of that facility, since it's not being used, as a school at this juncture, and we think that it would be nice to have more activity going on in the building. So please feel free to also use that building.
we appreciate that, Mayor. We actually I have been in contact with Andrea. She's been a great partner of ours, and so we have arrangements to use that facility when they're not going to be using it. And we start, I think it was next week we start, but we've been working with her on the schedule, so
Wonderful.
appreciate it.
I was trying to get a text, and I'm sorry, I forgot to check on this, of when they were gonna move the side basketball court. Do you know if they've done that yet, or if that's happening?
I don't believe it's done yet. I think they plan on doing it either next week or the following week.
Because I knew it was soon, right, okay, and you'll have to work around that, whatever time they do that, of course, in terms of.
Correct. Yeah, we've actually developed a pretty good rapport, not only with Steve Bergholm, but also with the custodians for the various facilities. So what we try to do whenever we do our schedules, we make sure that we make them aware, number one, that we'll be using the facilities. If there's any changes in our schedule, we make the custodians aware of that so that they aren't sticking around until 10 o'clock at night. In addition to that, we've really been making sure that our respect them, right? Just like they would respect their home and not leave water bottles and stuff around, so we really
Well,
wanna
actually, they
make sure.
probably would leave water bottles
Well,
around the
exactly,
house, but.
exactly, so, but we got a good rapport with the administration.
That's great. Bob, is this a league also that provides the $25 per payment to the total maintenance fund?
We discuss that all the time with all of the leagues, and Lisa sends out the contract with the bill. I mean, that's on the contract that we send out to the teams. And speaking of, historically, again, I'm fairly good at this, but historically, there has been, the youth basketball team has been somewhat consistent paying that fee, but we expect that they will contribute to the fund this year.
You look confused. Did you know about this?
We did, and
Okay.
we had discussions around this last year, around this particular fee, and to Bob's point, he is right. I've been a president for the last 2 years, and we want to contribute to the usage fee. I think our discussions were around how the fee was being used, not only for us, but the other youth programs in the Newburyport.
Trust me, it's all changing. We are coming together as all 22 coaches for all teams, working with youth, working with the city. And, we need to have this stream of revenue because we can never let any of our facilities, once we've been slowly upgrading, we've got to continue to, have this, revenue stream to be able to maintain all of our fields. So, it's important that you account for that, in your registration fees, because we really do need, cover costs of, because I assume you don't pay for the custodians, we do.
On the weekends, we pay for the custodians.
You do, okay. Well, that's good to know, okay. All right, for the time that you're there, so, thank you.
So, yeah, no, for regards to the fee, I mean, I think from a youth basketball perspective, we all wanna contribute to this program. I think what we wanna make sure happens is that a discussion and dialogue happens in terms of how those fees are being used. We understand, right, we need to maintain the fields, right, we know how.
But we also need to refinish the Knockmullen
Well,
floor.
exactly, that's
So
exactly
that
right.
it's not just, the field space, it's also gym space. Those are, things that, there's the scoreboards break or things like that. So, your fees will also take into consideration that there are gym space that also need work.
Correct.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, what I would add to that is that actually, part of the conversation that we had on Thursday was looking at the fees we're charging for facility use and looking to get some assurance that those fees are actually, some percentage of those fees are actually going back to take care of
The overhead.
the overhead in those, of just maintaining those. So the idea of making that contribution very much aligns with, in a larger sense, we want to make sure that if somebody's getting X amount of dollars for renting out the auditorium, that some of that money is going back into the auditorium to keep it maintained. So that's, again, why this policy conversation got suddenly bigger than we could accomplish. I think the other thing that I would add is that in my experience with the Youth Basketball League, that if we had 2 more gyms available and online for them, they would fill them. That in fact, the organization has been growing. 370 different kids involved in it this year is an extraordinary level of engagement, and I think it speaks not only to their dedication, but to how intensely we have these needs for making facilities available, so.
Any further, Mr. Decanter?
I have a question, probably, Mr. Clark, you might have the best possibility of answering. So the schedule that the Basketball Association is recommending steers clear pretty much of the high school schedule?
Yes.
So does that include Tom's clinics, or is that included in the Youth Basketball Association, the time there?
I guess I'll ask that. So right now, what we, at least with the boys program, historically, working with Tom, the youth programs, we primarily run all of our games on Saturday morning and afternoon. And then Tom, he would run his clinic for the youth, for the found that that worked pretty well, because again, usually we're working with the same group of kids. And so they go to play their games with us on Saturday, and then Sunday morning, they would head out Sunday morning, 11:30 to come and participate in this stuff.
Anything further? Are we ready to take a vote? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Great. Let us know.
Don't look so surprised.
Yeah, let us know how the schedule
bit
works out,
process
and then
there.
if there
It
are
was
problems,
okay.
come back to us and we'll have a further conversation. Okay? Good luck. Have a great season.
Great, thank you.
And thank you for all of your efforts for
And
all
I-
these kids.
I also want to thank the Vice Chair for allowing us to move this up so that we can.
Thank you. Fine. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is an overnight field trip request from the high school. Do I turn that over to you, Mr. Clark, or?
Want us to come up here?
Sure.
Oh, yeah, take these two seats.
Take these two seats?
Sure.
Great.
Join the group. We understand you have a proposal before us for a field trip. Pardon me? This is the hockey team?
This is the hockey team,
Didn't we have one this before?
last year. This-
Time flies.
I may,
It said addendum, I thought maybe it was, they were, made some changes to it.
no, I think it's at least the fourth year that.
This is our
you guys-
third, this is our third.
Okay. For the record, do you need to introduce myself? I'm the athletic director, I'm Bob Clark, the athletic director from the high school.
I am Paul Yameen, I'm the hockey coach at the high school.
So we take a trip down to Cape Cod, down in Hyannis, over the Christmas holiday break. We play 2 games down there. We're opening up against Mansfield. The second game is to be determined based upon whether or not we win. And it's a very competitive, situation for us. I mean, the teams who are down there are, when we say Division I teams, but they are competitive teams that we probably would not have the opportunity to play, since most of them are from the, South Shore or Cape Cod. So it's been a great experience, I think, for our kids. Paul, he has 4 coaches, and the coaches provide the supervision during the trip. Most of the students are transported by their parents, and they go down there on the 26th and the 27th of December, and it's one overnight, depending on, again, if they win, what time the game would be on the 27th, but they are scheduled for the 26th versus Mansfield.
How many parent chaperones do you have?
Most of the parents bring their children down there. The chaperones are myself and the 3 other coaches. So
Okay, and the parents stay overnight with you at the hotel?
they do, but we're not, we have our own little section in the hotel, and we've had it that way for 3 years. So there's 4 coaches, we're all in charge of 6 players as chaperones for the players. So we really don't see much of the parents, which, it's just like, that's how we like it.
I was gonna say, be careful what you say.
Not in a bad way, but
No.
we don't need any distractions.
You're the
It's a very good tournament.
Any problems raising funds for the students?
No, we have not had a problem, but they're well aware that if there is a problem, that we have a boosters that we request help out.
Any further questions? Anybody
Motion
else?
to approve?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? You're all set, thank you.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
And don't say if you play the second game, it's when you play
When.
the second.
That's right.
When we win.
Positive
That's right,
attitude.
that's right.
Thank you, gentlemen. Moving right along. The next item on our agenda is strategic planning, so I'm gonna turn that over to the superintendent.
I wanted to begin the conversation in early November, knowing that I had said to the school committee that I'd like to start this process in January. But I really wanted to have a dialogue with the school committee about expectations around strategic planning, whether or not you were looking for me to bring some different models to you. I just wanted to get some feedback as to what your expectations were surrounding this topic, so that I would have a better handle on what I needed to do between now and January.
Mayor?
Well, I think that, if I remember correctly, Susan, you had a large, like trifold that had the entire, right, that that was the strategic plan.
Yes.
And we had a notebook that was
800
probably
pages.
800 pages that we couldn't possibly get our arms around over the course of a year to make progress. So and that's all we've known, at least since I've been involved in the strategic planning, is bringing a large group of people together, which I think it involves a lot of input, there's no question about that, but it became such a cumbersome document that we've had, I think, for at least the last 10 years. So it would be nice to be able to develop something that is consistent with, I think, the kind of rubrics we're using for the evaluations, for the teacher evals, for our district goals, and sort of make it consistent with that type of a tool. And we develop our plan based on that, and then pick our immediate goals or dovetail the goals we've already set up in that. And that's just sort of my opinion on where we've been with strategic planning.
Anyone else? Mr. Decanter?
Yeah, I would say that my expectations are for this to become a living document. And by that, what I mean is that our planning cycle keeps that strategic plan alive, such that year one in the strategic plan is really your budget. Year two is looking forward as to where we're going. And 3, 4, and 5 are the outline years where you get into some of the more long-term goals. And each year you revise it, see what it was that you accomplished, take those off the plan, bring some of the things up from year 2, from year 3 if you can. And so that becomes a way in which we can consistently see how we're moving in the directions and the visions, the values, and everything else that we have placed in a brochure of that nature. The other thing that I would want to make sure we include in it is that each aspect of the plan is measurable, so that we can move forward and truly not just have it as a purple haze that we're heading after, but saying, hey, we did 32% of this because that's what the number shows us, and we still need to redouble our efforts to get to 64 plus next year. So those are the two things that I would look for, is a 5-year rotation. Not we do a plan that is good for 5 years. It's a 5-year plan that's renewed every year.
Any further comment? Mr. Menon? Excuse me.
Yeah, I tend to be sort of a process guy. So I'm interested in a model of strategic planning that finds a way to engage the community in some conversation at some point, somewhere in the process, and whether that's early on or that's midway through. So I'm interested in a process that does that. And again, with all the strategic planning we've done in this community and the time I've been around, we've done everything from charrettes and to small ad hoc committees reporting out, but a way to engage the community. And I do think that we're sort of, as Nick and I were sort of working to put together the self-evaluation, we really had this sort of epiphany that ties our evaluating how we're doing to the mission statement. So I would like to see the strategic plan tied to some overarching sense of what it is we're really trying to accomplish, and whether the mission statement captures that or not. It certainly can be part of the conversation, but it does really help to have a benchmark that says this is what it's about. So those would be the two pieces that I would add to it.
Anyone else? Mr. Lukens?
So, I mean, just in terms of thinking about putting the plan together, I think one of the things that would be helpful as a first step or as an initial step is putting together a pretty comprehensive project plan that clearly outlines what steps need to be followed and when and by whom in terms of getting from where we are now to, a vote on what the actual strategic plan looks like. So there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of stakeholder groups, there are a lot of different things that need to be happening simultaneously, there are things that need to be happening that are dependent on a previous step. So I think just outlining what that plan is and making sure that we're all clearly aligned in terms of what steps need to happen and at what times and by whom in terms of getting to the point where we can talk about the actual plan itself.
Superintendent, I'd like to ask you, what process you went through to develop this strategic plan, because I know this, and I carry it around with me because I think it's fantastic, but there's a lot more behind it than this
There is.
document.
That's the
So-
final product.
Right, and could you talk about sources that would help you develop this and what that would entail for us as a district?
We worked with, at the time they were called Cambridge Strategic Planning. They're an outfit out of, I think they're down in,
Not Cambridge?
no, they're not in Cambridge, Massachusetts. They were down south somewhere, and we worked with them over 4 5-year strategic plans. And it necessitates bringing a facilitator in over a 3-day period initially that involved the leadership team, a couple of members of the school committee, a couple of parents, some teachers, some students, some community members. Bringing that together as the overall team to set and identify strengths and weaknesses, do a SWOT analysis, typically what I'm sure you've been through before. Then identifying what are the major areas and creating action teams that actually go out and do the work, and then come back. The overall planning team then hears from each of the action teams and can either reject or accept the plans that they bring forward. And that planning team is the one that votes on it. This is a final product when the whole thing is done, because I'm a believer that you want to be able to be succinct in your plan and have it be a trifold document that can list everything that you want to identify. And it also outlines statement of beliefs that the district has, and also what are the parameters that are in there. Typically, we had anywhere from 4 to 6 strategies that we worked on over a 5-year plan, and within each strategy, there would be 5 or 6 actual plans within each strategy. So, and one of them was also something that I've talked with you about, which is the development of core ethical values.
And that's a big piece of this. It's simple, but it's there. Did you hire a facilitator?
We did.
And can you talk about the benefits of that?
The benefits for me are you have somebody who comes in and who can ask questions with outside eyes. It also allowed me as superintendent to participate in the process fully. It's very difficult to run the process and participate in it in the same way. So that's one of the reasons why I am very interested in bringing a facilitator in.
And did you work with the same, I didn't understand it. You worked 4 years in a row with the same facilitator on a 5-year plan, or was that 20 years old?
20 years.
The same?
We were very fortunate that we had the same facilitator over 20 years. Yeah. So he knew our district very, very well.
I would think so.
Very well.
Yeah. So may I ask you a question? How would
Is he
you?
still working?
Well, no, I mean.
He retired, the last plan that was done in that school district was the last plan he did, and then he retired.
You
So
killed him.
He agreed to hold out until he finished with us, so.
Would you investigate facilitators for this process
Yes.
here, do you believe? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I'm sure there's
I
a
think that
budgetary.
obviously, that's one of the things that I want to bring forward to you before January, is what the budgetary implications would be, because I think we need to be realistic about that. But I do want to investigate what other districts around here have done, and I also do want to contact Cambridge and see what has changed in the last few years. So, but they travel all over the world and do this. So there's a lot of different organizations that do this. So I'd like to, maybe what I can do is come back to you with some options.
Sounds great. Thank you.
I'd like to see that. Any further? Mr.
Yeah,
Hall?
I was scribbling out some notes, and the first thing I put right at the top was the SWOT, because I think that's crucial. And you know, and the other thing is that any short and long-term goals are really crafted toward what the school district, not just needs, but where its strengths are. And I'm sure there'll be a good discussion about, you know, the concept of either building strength upon strength or trying to fill your gaps. Sometimes you can oftentimes waste a lot of resources if you fill your gaps. Sometimes you get more bang out of building strength than strength, but that's all something the group decides. But I think that's a key first step. I like what you've produced or what you've suggested. I also, from having, you know, going down for the site visit, it was clear that the staff down there were immersed, you know, in the values, walk the talk, and that takes time to do. And I think it was 9 years, wasn't it, basically?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's the first few steps on a journey, but it's one that I think would really benefit the school district.
Anything else? So, Superintendent, would you come back to us, you know, whenever you're ready with some information about the Cambridge firm, any other firm that, and the cost analysis, and we can move from there? Does anybody have a thought
good.
about, do you think?
good.
Okay, thank you. Does that give you enough information? Okay. Moving on to the next item on our agenda, and I hope everybody brought their, well, you don't have to, your own copy. We're gonna talk a little bit about the school committee self-evaluation. I wanted to break this discussion up into two meetings. This evening, we are prepared with a composite of our evaluation that Mr. Lukens prepared. We are still working on a summary statement and actionable plan that we would like to undertake as a result of the perceived strengths and weaknesses of the school committee. We, just to give you a little bit of a background, we decided as a committee that we wanted to follow the Massachusetts evaluation document, so two of our members worked to develop the Newburyport School Committee self-evaluation report based on the state standards and the teacher evaluation document. Then two other of our members developed the document, took all the information in this document from the state, things we felt we needed, and also took a look at the district goals. So, Mr. Lukens, is there anything you would like to talk about the composite before I give the composites?
No,
Okay.
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's best to just,
Okay. What I did, and I really apologize, because I was in, I don't know, the 19th century today when I was doing this, but what I did, Mr. Lukens did all the information for the composite itself, but what I did is I took each of the standards, and then I took governance, fiscal planning, community engagement, and culture. We'll have it fixed. I don't have a secretary. It's raw, very raw. But anyway, there were 4 standards that we were addressing, and standard 1 was governance and leadership, which our overall rating was proficient. Our second standard was management and operations. The overall grade was proficient. Family and community engagement needs improvement, and culture was proficient. Those were the broad categories that we looked at when defining our work on this committee. Then underneath each one of those standards, we judged ourselves on elements that were developed based on documents from the state, goals and objectives, policy, information, discussion. Underneath that, we had varying results from people. So what I've given the committee is, without names, the composite of how each of us ranked each of those areas. And then in the final column, and I'm sorry you can't, maybe Kathy can help with this. In the final column is the final scoring of where we feel we stand as a committee. The interesting thing to me was Standard 4, which is culture. All 7 of us graded ourselves as proficient. If I go down under governance, and I'm just following the same sheet here. If we go to the governance subsection, we all voted proficient, and we had 1 exemplary on element 1E, which is superintendent relations. Subcategory committee members enable open communication with the superintendent to ensure effective goal setting for the district, facilitate support for these goals through providing the district with the required resources, and completes timely performance reviews. That was a unanimous, well, I'm sorry, it wasn't. We had 6 proficients and 1 exemplary in that area. Under culture, for element 4A, commitment to high standards, fosters a shared commitment to high standards of service, teaching, and learning with high expectations for achievement for all. The entire committee, wait a minute, where am I? Yep, rated us, well, we all rated proficient in that area. On element 4D, which is a shared vision, the school committee recognizes our mission statement as the shared vision with the community for education in Newburyport. We continue to engage all stakeholders in the creation, regular review of shared educational vision in which every student is prepared to succeed in post-secondary education and become a responsible citizen and global contributor. We all rated, all of us, all 7 of us rated us as proficient. I skipped one in number 3, which is community engagement. Standard 3B. Wait a minute, I think it's 2B, 3B. Responsiveness. Policy to respond to requests for information via email or in public meetings on a timely basis is in its place and followed. We all rated ourselves needs improvement, and as you know, we had a communication committee. So I think at this point, we're well aware of our strengths and weaknesses. We are, at the moment, writing an executive summary about recommendations we will have and actions that we may take as a result of this. Mr. Menon's working on that executive summary. Is there anything you would like to say at this point, Mr. Menon, or would you like to wait till you're finished?
No, I can give everybody an update. I have, the way I've arranged it is that I've looked at each set of comments in each of the standards, and then I've sort of recapped them, and then I've done, for lack of a better word, I've done some analysis, essentially, sort of taking a look at what the comments are clearly suggesting or what they might be suggesting. Taking a look at, there are some real inconsistencies where, you know, we were strongly ranked a certain way and there were no comments really backing that up. So I'm trying to take a look at some of those things. And I've completed each of the standards, and the remaining, what I have remaining to do is taking a look at that first section of overall comments where we sort of gave our summation. And I haven't taken that apart, deconstructed that. I expect to get that done tomorrow. And at that point, at the conclusion of each section, I've noted that what often seemed to occur was that in areas in which we were rated as needs improvement, it was almost like, you know, not a lot of us put down the evidence that existed, whether it was there or wasn't there, But a lot of people would make suggestions if they wrote needs improvement, that if we did this, this, and this, that would be really helpful. So for each section, I think extracting all of that information is going to really take us a lot farther along in setting up an action plan. So whether I will do that or whether I will just say, all that stuff's there, let's do that collectively, you know, I'll have some conversation with some folks tomorrow about that. But I do want to have this thing done by tomorrow. And again, the last section that I need to look at is looking at our sort of introductory comments, or our big summaries, or in some cases, our medium-sized summaries that were offered. So that's where it stands, but we should be able to move pretty quickly towards extracting. There were some really terrific suggestions, and there were a number of times when there were suggestions that were made that we're already doing.
So that leads me to the next step. At our next meeting, I'd like to discuss what our action plan might be. So I'd like to have a little discussion right now about things that we feel we should do with this information. One of the things we didn't do this year, at the beginning of our school year last year, was set goals for ourselves as a school committee that we were going to be rated on. So that's one of the things I'd like to ask. I'd like to ask people if they feel comfortable having one goal in each of the standards. And if so, we write them as SMART goals that are measurable goals. They become part of this evaluation document. As you know, this evaluation is cyclical. So right now, we're on the part where we've gathered the information we need, and we need to now move on as to what we're going to do with the information we've learned about ourselves as a committee. One of the action plans may be that we have a half-day retreat and discuss the things that we were far apart on. I didn't count up the number of elements, but there were only 5 of them that we all kind of agreed on. So I think we have a lot of conversation to be had. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that so we can begin to plan what our actions would be. Comments, please? Yes.
I think my vision is that we use this as first step in actually establishing goals for ourselves so that we have something to measure against next year. When we have the different standards, whether we have one goal against a standard or 2, it might be, I wouldn't want to paint myself into a corner on any specific number, but other than to say they need to be a small number of goals that we're setting for ourselves so that it's something that we can focus on and achieve. There's some that we probably recognize needs improvement and we just need to keep on keeping on, whereas there are others that, even though they're proficient, we say, this is really important to us, we will need to put more effort into. So I would say somewhere between 0 and 2 goals for each of the standards, are close to 20 different standard statements that we have here that we can take a look at and choose which ones we're going to focus on, and then have enough plans of action to really support that particular one. That's the way I would like to read this.
A comment I would like to make is that I am struck by the variability. And I think that certainly warrants some further discussion, because there's a lot of variability here, and I think that it's going to be important to be able to discuss how people were interpreting each of the elements.
I would agree with that. So, Mr. Menon?
Yeah, I also wanted to note the variability not only in possibly in the interpretation, but also in the responses themselves, which, although it may not have come out in discussions about culture or about governance, my overarching impression from looking at all of the comments gathered in one place, that there are a number of things that we really need to talk about that we're not on the same page about, that we really need, you know, and again, it hasn't emerged as a specific issue, but it's just it's very clear when you see how variable some of these things are. The second thing having to do with the variability is that one of the things that has to emerge from this conversation, this is a pilot. This was a draft document. This was our best stab at trying to align ourselves with the way that we're evaluating the superintendent and the way that the teaching staff and faculty are being aligned. We fully expect that we may discover that half the variability has to do with the questions not being stated in a clear enough fashion, or smartly enough, or whatever. So we need to have, I think, piece of what we need to do is a discussion of the template itself. Did it work? What was frustrating about it? I know that I had a conversation with Audrey, and there were some things that really frustrated her. If we put a long list of things and you agree with half of them, how do you then rank it? So there may be some structural things. The other thing, and this is sort of the radical pragmatist part in me, the pragmatic part that says what makes sense, and the radical part that says let's not waste time, let's do it. We every January we reorganize ourselves, and I think our conversation should happen soon enough that we can take a look going into the next year. Are we setting ourselves up in terms of committees, in terms of supporting committees and subcommittees in a way that makes sense? Do we need to look at some ways that we're structurally approaching what we're doing? It may be that everything is fine. It may be that when January comes around, we can logically say, we really need to have something standing around this issue, but this issue can be moved over to this group. Let's have that conversation, because that's the time we naturally sort of re-up. So I think that those are things that I think emerged from my perspective on this, having not only worked with Nick in writing this, but also having a chance to see how people responded in the summative part, in the feeling part of it. It was a very useful exercise, I think. Both ends of it were very useful for me to work with Nick on trying to line us up, align us. But it was really interesting information and very variable. So I think there is a lot to talk about. Whether that takes place here or in some sort of retreat or something. I don't know, but we got some splaining to do, I think.
Any other comments, Mr. Lukens?
So in terms of thinking about putting goals together, I think that it's an opportunity that we can use to leverage our subcommittees. So several of the standards align pretty neatly with the work of the individual subcommittees. So you have policy-related goals, you have curriculum-related goals, you have finance and budgeting-related goals, you have interaction with the city council and other stakeholders-related goals. And so I would certainly offer, as chair of the curriculum committee, to put on the next agenda outlining the specific SMART goals that are curriculum-related in nature, and then tying those back to the standards and the self-evaluation as part of that work. It's already on the agenda for the next curriculum subcommittee meeting anyway, but I think going one step further and tying those to standards that we've outlined in our self-evaluation, I think we can save ourselves a lot of work by doing a lot of the heavy lifting around goal setting within the subcommittees, and then taking those back to the committee as a whole as recommendations. So that's my own personal opinion in terms of how I think that we can get to the point of establishing goals more quickly if we can use our subcommittees to do a lot of that work.
I think that's a good idea.
I do too. I think it's a great idea.
Mr. Cole?
Yeah, a couple of comments. First, I think one thing that's useful here, and the variance has been referred to several times in our brief discussion thus far, I think it's important to look at the extremes and try to work toward some consensus. And at least what you'll get from that is perhaps understanding where someone's coming from with their observation and sharing what yours is. The other thing that I find with these types of evaluations, whether it be this or whether it be a real data-based empirical type of evaluation, is I think we don't want to get into the situation where we're being prescriptive. And while I know Mr. Menon mentioned that people have mentioned, well, if we do this or we do that or we need to do this, that sometimes isn't the best way to go. I think what is more effective is noting what the trends are, noting what the cross-cutting themes are through these different standards, and then figuring out, okay, do we need to change this trend? Do we need to change this theme? What do we want to do to improve it? So, not to say that it's not, good to determine what you need to do, but sometimes it's important to observe what's going on, and then effectively, how do we treat it? How do we change it? So, that's just my thought.
Mayor?
I appreciate Mr. Minnon's comments because I think I was probably very hard on us when I did the evaluation because again, it being a new tool and how I think of proficiency, I said I wish there was something in between needs improvement and proficient because it was hard for me and I erred on the lower side when I couldn't quite get us to proficient. But does that mean that we're not moving forward? So I think that conversations are good. January is a point where we do our reorg, but I also think we have tremendous amount of work that we're doing and momentum here where having each of the groups develop the SMART goal and then we can sort of come back and sort of take a look at our retreat, whether or not we're able to schedule that between now and January, I don't know, in addition to our January retreat, given people's calendars. But I think it's a huge step forward in the right tool with us getting more familiar with it and being able to own a little bit more of the in-depth content. I think this will be truly reflective of the work that we do together.
Mr. DeCanter?
Yeah, I like the idea of a discussion and figuring out the outliers. I particularly like the idea of getting to work on writing goals that Mr. Lucan suggested. The concern I would have there is a great number of these goals are directly related to communications. And we do not, at this point, have a standing communications committee anymore. So I would like to ask that perhaps we get the people who participated in the communications ad hoc committee to get together and evaluate some of those objectives to prepare the goals for that. Otherwise, we'll be falling short on one of those sections. So I don't know if that makes sense, Cheryl.
Yes.
You, Bruce, and I.
No, I think it's a great idea.
Who were involved with the ad hoc committee on communications.
So can we run through the list in terms of who
Yeah,
we do?
I think that's a good idea. I think maybe that's a step we can take right now is to look at the 4 standards. First one being governance. What committee do you feel that belongs in?
Probably policy.
Probably policy.
Okay, so let's agree that that's where governance is gonna be handled. Is that all right? Okay. Physical planning, that would be the FinCom committee. Mr. Cole, that would be you as the chair, so I guess I'd look for that. Community engagement, I think,
Is it communication?
but this isn't getting to, Mr. Lukens, I'm gonna go back to you, because this isn't getting to curriculum the way I'm doing this right now. So how do you see that fitting in? I know it does, but,
Just looking at the standards, so if you take standard 1, for example, which is governance. So clearly 1B policy is a fit with the policy.
Yep.
And then you have like 1E, the superintendent relations, and that might be a better fit for the superintendent evaluation committee. So I think that you could assign the job of putting goals together and having more discussion around each of the sub-standards
elements.
rather than just each of the 4 standards. So I think when you do it that way, there are things that fit with each of the
Okay.
committees.
That makes sense. because culture was also one, we all agreed that our overall rating for culture was proficient. But I also think that, given the subcategories under that, there may be some things we need to address as well. So, I myself kind of like that idea by breaking up the elements rather than the standards perhaps. But I don't think, do we need to spend the time right now doing that and people are responsible for an element? Or would you like I don't know, how would you like to proceed in deciding who's responsible for what element? But what I want to dissuade us from doing is having a goal for each element. It's way too much, and so that's why I was trying to broaden the categories so that we weren't, but I agree with you. Maybe I can work on that and send something out, and then you can, or somebody else could do it and send it to me.
Well, it sounds like, just under governance, there's two. You have the curriculum subcommittee and policy committee who can, because I think those two are important, and even if you end up with two under that standard, that's okay. We have FinCom who will do fiscal planning, the communication ad hoc who will take something in community engagement, and then, Cheryl, why don't you and I tackle the culture?
Okay.
And so then everybody has a piece, and see what we come up with to come back for the next school committee meeting.
Is that okay?
As a starting
that-
point?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yes.
and I think I completely agree with the need to focus on a small number of goals. I think, one of the elements that came out of the self-evaluation, these several comments were that I think we should be more focused on a smaller number of goals so that we can make meaningful progress in those areas. I think that there are already several things going on that we can classify as a goal, so I completely agree that we should seek not to create a lot of new goals. But given all of the work that's already happening in the various committees and among the group as a whole, I think that we can already attach a lot of that work and those goals into the evaluation as it exists. So I think it's just a matter of classifying where those things fit. We may not need to create a lot of
SMART goals for every one of them,
because
right.
we already have them, we just haven't discussed them as.
Well, we have, that's the other part, I'm sorry, Mr. Decanter, but that's the other part I wanted to bring up. We have a document now that we have I think we've approved this, the district goals, which were developed. So I very much want us to tie into those as well, and I don't want to reinvent kind of a new wheel, because family and community is in here, engaging students, management and operations, a curriculum and assessment. So there were 5 areas, and professional culture, there were 5 areas that the district has determined are district goals. So just as we want to match our evaluation with the district's evaluation, I think we really need to keep these district goals in mind as well, so that everything ties together for us and we're all working toward the same thing. Mr. Decanter.
Well, I agree with that approach, and then I have another comment as
That's
well.
okay.
Well, I agree with that approach. I think as we move forward, it should be the school committee goals probably should come first as the umbrella for the district goals, because we're responsible of setting the overall direction for the district, rather than us trying to see how we can mold our overall goals to match what the superintendent has already proposed to us. This year being the first year, I recognize that didn't happen. I think that's something we should move to. The other thing I would suggest is that as we go through these general areas that have been assigned to the different committees, we take a look at the different elements and say, okay, which ones are either because of the diverse evaluation or because of the situation in which we did evaluate it consistently, which of these goals truly require our attention at this time, and work on those.
Yes.
And so that if each committee comes up with 2 or 3, then we can, as a committee, choose from those 2 or 3 from each of the subcommittees what we want to focus on as an entire group. But if we spend our time trying to write a goal for each one of these standards, I think we're gonna go nuts.
Well, each of the elements, I
Each of the
agree, not the
elements, yeah.
standards, but, you know, I agree with that. I just think we want to tie everything together so that we're all working from the same sort of
Yeah.
standards. So, it's my understanding then that the next time that each subcommittee meets, that this will certainly be on the agenda. We are on the agenda for an actionable plan for our next school committee meeting. I'm not sure we all have subcommittee meetings in between. So I'm gonna ask, Mr. Cole, when is our next, fin-
November 13th, so that fits.
that fits. Mr. Menon, when is policy?
Policy met on Thursday, we haven't set up another date, we'll do that before this.
You think you
season's
could
out.
do
We're
one
trying to meet
before?
every 2 weeks.
But do you think you could have a meeting before the 17th so we could report back out from the policy committee?
Yep.
Okay. Mr. Lukens, do we have a meeting before the 17th?
No, we have one, our next meeting is on the 18th, the day after.
Too late. Okay, but that doesn't mean we can't circulate or try to work, online or hold a meeting. And then, Mayor, you and I will set up a schedule just to do culture ourselves. Anything else you'd like to add at this
Well,
point?
communications committee.
Who's on communications? Are we gonna reinstitute that committee?
Right, that's what was suggested.
No, I think what Nick was talking about was we have an ad hoc group that we would invite in to help us set the goals.
Okay.
So I was involved with that, Nick was, so why don't we work with you to pull that group together?
I have them on an email track.
Great, yeah, so we'll talk with you
All of
about
them,
pulling
so-
them together.
You can let me know what you want me to say in a memo and we'll get up. I guess I would like for the 3 people that worked on the communications subcommittee this summer to get together first and kind of frame what we're talking about. So we'll have to set up there are 4 of us, I guess. We'll have to set up a meeting to do that. And then we'll move on from there, because I think that ad hoc committee was very useful to us as a committee. Anything further? Thank you. Next item on our agenda is the closing of the Brown School, and I'm gonna turn that over to someone, but I don't know who. The mayor?
I would assume that would be me.
Okay.
We've had, obviously, the Brown School closed as a school at the end of June. And we had to move youth services out of the Kelly School because the Kelly School was in terrible shape, as I think you all recall from past conversations. That is gone out to bid a second time because we didn't like the proposals on the Kelly School we received, and those proposals are due this week. So we moved youth services over to the first floor of the Brown School, and much to our surprise, her census is doubled. We thought the fact that they were moving further away from the Knockmullen, but then again, we do have a bus that does take students there in the afternoon, and the gym, I think, is a big asset to the program there. So we had an RFP that we had 5 respondents to it, and the city selected Winter Street Architects from Salem, who came in over the past couple months and evaluated all the systems in the building, the roof, windows, heating system, any hazmat materials in the building. And also, after a series of community meetings that we had prior to hiring the architect, where we began to just have conversations about what people would see or think would make sense for this building. And it was pretty clear that people would like it to stay a vibrant, active community building, whatever that means. Keeping the playground, keeping the basketball court, potentially youth services, and then how does the second and third floor integrate into this kind of vision. So they looked at the possibility of doing some type of businesses, but the parking can't support that in terms of the one-to-one kind of parking that's needed in the neighborhood. They looked at art studios, possibly live-in art studios, and senior market rate housing, as on the second and third floor. So, the feasibility draft study was presented to, the community last Thursday night, and, lot of discussion, lot of concerns. So, but in order for the city to move forward, after we spend this next wave of meeting with developers to find out if what the feasibility study has suggested is financially possible for any developer to come in and would want to do a project like that. So, since there are lots of questions, there's the feasibility study is posted online with a comment period through November 17th. Anyone is welcome to comment on the feasibility study. We're going to assemble all that information and then post it all for everyone to see, everyone's comments. The butters to the neighborhoods in the South End would like to have a follow-up meeting after we have a little more information from developers who have looked at this feasibility study. We're hoping to do that before the end of December. But because there are so many, I think, moving pieces to this, in conversation with our planning director and our Ward 2 counselor, we decided that it made sense to put together an ad hoc committee. So I've asked Bruce, as a member of the school committee, but also as a longtime resident of the South End, if he would sit on that committee. Myself, Peter Lombardi, Allison Hartquist as Ward 1 counselor, Jared Eigerman as the Ward 2 counselor, and Paula Turcott, who is been kind of rallying the neighborhood and sending out notices and keeping notes and following what's been going on in the city level and sending that out in an email blast to residents. So our obligation as a school committee is that we have to hold a public hearing and obtain feedback, and then would have to vote on relinquishing the building as a school building to the city so that they could move forward on these next steps. Now, I think, as you know, Mr. Meny sent out last week a list of questions that I think the school committee needs to answer before we're ready to move forward on a public hearing or making decisions regarding that building. Now, one thing that I thought you should know was at the end of the feasibility study, they were talking $13–14 million to get that building into a situation where you'd have artist space or potentially 24 market rate and affordable units. So the building's in pretty rough shape. So the question about space and the question about census, I think, are ones that first and foremost we need to answer. And then we can continue moving forward in parallel tracks when this committee is ready to make a decision regarding the disposition of the school.
Mr. Menon.
Yeah. I appreciate the mayor's invitation to sit on the ad hoc committee. I think that's going to be a very useful conversation. What I sent out to everybody and over the, I guess at the end of last week, was essentially a series of questions, but I think in a larger sense, it was a call to have a very pragmatic, a very realistic conversation about existing needs in the school system, and without sort of jumping the gun on strategic planning, having been through decommissioning a building, having been through looking at a set of projections for a building, this one, that didn't quite bear out over a period of time, I personally think not only do we have a statutory responsibility to do some real due diligence before we let go of an asset like the Brown School. However much, I understand that it's going to need a lot of money to be renovated to make it perfectly useful. But that's perfectly useful isn't the question I think that we need to deal with. I think the question that we need to be asking is, what are the immediate needs that this school system has? And we have some needs, even in spite of all the construction work that we've done. We've been aware, anybody who's sat in on our budget hearings knows that we've got a serious problem with space at the NOC and a serious problem with space here. And the way that that plays out is that we can't offer classes because we don't have classroom space. There are not only classes that we can't offer that are electives, but there are more sections of some core classes. The way it plays out at the middle school is we can't offer world languages because we can't squeeze it in. We've actually begun to try to do some creative things, getting outside the school day for some electives here at the high school. It seems to me it's prudent before we release an asset that we've got to have that conversation, to look at what the trends are, to look at what some of our numbers are, look at the estimates we've been relying on, look at how we're storing things, for example. You know, if we can free up 2 rooms in each building by moving storage someplace else, maybe the Brown, maybe someplace else, and open up classroom space, now is a really good time to talk about that while we have that as an asset. It is not decommissioned. It is no longer an elementary school, but it hasn't been decommissioned as a school. And my understanding is that we can reopen it as a school, and it gets grandfathered under the way the rules exist. Am I suggesting we do that? No, I'm suggesting we talk about whether there is some sense to making any use of that building for the school system on a short-term basis, whether it's storage, whether it's a summer academy, whatever. So I think we have 2 kinds of conversations. One's are what are our needs now, and how can we, before we let go of this asset, how are we going to try to address them? Because it's real. They're not imaginary. It's been at least 3 budget sessions that Mike Parent has sat here and said, I don't have the space. I don't have physical space to do this anymore. We've got 30 kids signing up for labs, and there were 24 spaces in a lab. How are we gonna deal with that? Because we have to deal with that. But then we also have this wonderful dream conversation, which is we barely do summer school here for kids. We do it for special needs kids. We don't do remedial summer school. We don't do enrichment summer school. If we had a space that was available, could we do it? It's very hard to do it in these buildings because the summer is when we clean them up and we paint them and we take care of them. But if there was another space where we could do that, would that even be a revenue generator for us? I have no idea. But it seems to me that it's a really good time to have that conversation now before we're looking back on ourselves 3 years later saying, oh my God, we should have hung on to that building because now we've got this. Let's talk about it now. So while the feasibility study and that whole community process can go forward, I think we have a due diligence statutory obligation to really look at some, maybe even some uncomfortable things, but let's do it. And that is what I had proposed to everybody, that we take this opportunity to do that. Because I think we're all trying to do the best thing for the kids, and we're doing some really good things for kids, but we've got some problems that we keep hearing about every budget season, that even the new construction hasn't been able to completely address. So let's talk about what it might take, you know?
Mr. DeCanto?
I would agree completely with Bruce's approach, and I think, and the mayor's approach, because I seem to be walking along hand in hand on this one, which is encouraging and wonderful. I also think that we need to take a look at not only the downsides and potential problems that Bruce is suggesting, but also the opportunities. And what are the opportunities? Because that's the only way we're going to get that balanced approach. So if we go with the idea that whatever revenues we get from either selling or developing or renting the Brown School could be used towards bolstering our school budget, what is that going to look like? How is that going to work? Is that going to be something that can be assured over long periods of time or not? So all of the upside piece of it, I think we need to take a look at as well. What are the opportunities to come up with a balanced view, and then based upon that, make the appropriate decisions.
Ms. McCarthy?
So I've just 2 questions. Well, one is, I do know if it's ever been discussed about, a lot of school districts have parent information where their superintendent and their administrative staff is in a separate building. Whether that's something that we would want to consider, given our space at the middle school. And number 2, I just didn't know what the status of the bricked area, the
Lydia's.
Lydia's. Is there any more talk about that? Is anyone from that foundation, I don't know what it's called, foundation?
Lydia's
on the-
Foundation. Mhm.
Is anyone on that ad hoc committee?
No, because that's just, I think one piece, and they have said very clearly they want it moved to the Bresnahan. But because was so much site work going on at the Bresnahan, we, at one of the last school committee meetings, I think we agreed that we would wait until everything's settled, and then in the spring, we would take a look at how the kids are using the spaces, the basketball court would be done, the Foursquare, and we could really look at where it made sense to move it to. And there's still money left in the Bresnahan budget that we can do something with that. But if we do it ourselves in terms of moving it, I'm sure it won't cost what was it, 48.65? I can't remember. It was like astronomical amount of money to move it. So, and plus there's concern by the principals that they didn't want some of the granite sharp-edged benches to be moved. So we'll work through all those issues, I think, in the spring. But I think that the issues are much broader than that, so I think it makes more sense in terms of the constellation of what we, put on that committee. But certainly if there's another school committee member who would like to be part of that ad hoc committee, just let us know. Susan would like to know your recommendation on how we proceed in terms of looking at, do we, set meetings up with each of the principals and talk about space and their needs and enrollment, and then bring that meeting back to the whole?
We certainly can do that. I mean, I have some preliminary enrollment data, but I do think that we do need to look at that. I did explore with Steve Bergholm today whether or not there are currently what could be classroom spaces that we're using as storage, and he said there's nothing like that. He said all of the spaces in all of the buildings that are currently being used for storage would not lend themselves at all to instructional spaces. But I do think that I have an obligation to talk with principals.
And the other piece that we've been approached by two brothers who own a large building down on Merrimack Street that the manufacturing is out of it. It's right on the river, and they're wondering if we would have any interest in using it for classroom space, and to do could be our environmental studies or place-based education. And so Susan and I had met with Dr. Meserve. I think I had mentioned this before, and she's interested in sort of starting a partnership, but I sense she wants to move a little more slowly.
Dr. Meserve is from where?
From Salem State University.
Thank you.
In my conversations with Marty Meehan at UMass Lowell, they're just overcommitted at this point in terms of setting up the engineering program in that space they're taking in Havel. Haven't had a recent conversation with Dr. Lane Glenn, but I understand that our dual credit program has doubled from 4 to 8 students since it started. So I think that that's, something else that, we need to start thinking about. And the president of Merrimack College has reached out to us and is interested in having a conversation about this building. We also just submitted, Dr. Terry just submitted with the help of our city grant writer, a NOAA grant for place-based education and the Drifters program. So there's sort of little pockets of things that could come together that could help move forward in terms of creating some classroom space down by the river. It could be 15,000 square feet ultimately, or ultimately the whole building as a campus. So, but it would be nice to start small and begin to see how we could look at partnerships. We also know the transition group is interested in getting out of the high school. They don't think the 18 to 22-year-old students do belong here. They'd like to move them somewhere else. So they're having conversations right now with the Brown School, I think, as just a temporary alternative site, but they need something else too. So, I mean, those are sort of all the kinds of thoughts we've been having about how we can begin to make some changes, adjust some of the programs potentially in the high school. My parents said he would also be interested in having additional conversations about what we did for the theater and the change in the schedule there. So I think those are all part of conversations that fit into this broad conversation too.
And I, for one, am thrilled to hear all this, because I agree with Mr. Menon. I think this is the point where we really need to do due diligence for our community and turn over every rock there could possibly be. And I am real pleased to hear about place-based education and thoughts of getting the kids out of school and into, you know, the real world. And I think this is the time to take a look at all those opportunities and just have rich conversation about what we have, what we don't have, and what we need. So I'm really happy to hear that. Can you just tell me, what is the goal of the ad hoc committee?
The goal of the ad hoc committee is to address all the steps that need to happen as we move forward in the reuse and adaptive reuse of the Brown School building, and to ensure that the abutters and the South End neighborhood is well-informed and has an opportunity to provide input. So that's really focused on the neighborhood and the South End, I believe, as well as the reuse of the school, plans for the reuse of the school.
And then who's gonna handle, who's gonna do the discussion about other uses of places? Does that fit in here, or is that another
I think it fits in
topic?
this group.
Okay, right, and, well, I don't wanna let that go, because
I
I'm liking hearing that we're looking at opportunities for kids to expand.
Well, I think that part of the conversation is being able to move forward now that particularly Susan can breathe. And
Can you yet?
Almost.
Okay.
And I just think that there was little time at the start of the school year to reach back to Dr. Meserve, who was really interested in starting to partner with us. So I think there's an opportunity, you know, for us to start doing actively those meetings, beginning with the president of Merrimack College, who is interested in just sitting down and talking with us. He'd also wanted to do a walk through the building, so.
Good.
So that was.
That's exciting.
Exciting also. So I think that Susan and I could start taking the lead on this in terms of her meeting with all the principals and discussing space, and I'll work with her office to set up and continue these meetings, because they come to us in terms of wanting to know what we want to do with these empty buildings, and
Great.
we'll just, you know, continue to share the information at school committee meetings as we move forward.
I think that's important to share the
Yeah.
information with all of the
Yeah.
committee, because I wasn't aware of the meeting last week in the South End, and, you know, I think the public hearing on this issue is gonna be really important, and I think we need to have strength of information when we get to that public hearing, so that somebody can answer some of these questions that are looming everywhere.
We will. We'll
Mr.
get there.
Menon, I'm feeling good about that now. Mr. Menon.
Yeah, I just wanted to, you know, things may have changed, but having been involved with the Kelly School, my recollection was that if the school committee has not decommissioned the building, then it can be reopened as a school for any level. And that, in fact, one of the things that we had conversations about was if older kids went into that building, in fact, the standards, even the grandfather standards, are much less restrictive than they would be if we were going to be putting elementary school kids back in the building for education. So again, I'm not suggesting that we reopen it, but I'm highly encouraged by the idea of, you know, maybe a group here from the high school moving over there. I think that all that kind of stuff is very good, appropriate conversation, which gets at some of that, let's free up space here and then identify the resources we need to be able to run some of those classes if we've got space to do it. So it's those kinds of conversations that are really what I was sort of driving at. But also that you know, that wonderful imagination. I mean, we've been under siege for so long. We've never had the conversation about how neat it might be to do a magnet school at the junior high level on STEM, or to do an arts school. We've never had those conversations, and that's where I think you activate a whole other part of the community to, you know, I mean, it's really easy to say, it's gotta be too expensive. You know, it's much more respectful, I think, to say, let's have the conversation for 10 minutes.
How did
and
they
talk
do it in
about that.
Concord?
They did some miracle in Concord, and, you know,
Right.
the idea of having, I mean, we had talked 2 or 3 years ago. We were all down looking at a building on the waterfront as potentially a place-based education. That's not an old idea. It is an old idea. The idea, it's fascinating to me to be able to have these real-life campuses spread out across the city that really are under the umbrella of our school system. That we've got something on the waterfront that we're doing
Right.
place-based and research on. And, you know, let's not box ourselves in here. We can have some good conversations, and they don't need to be driven by a need to sort of make a decision right now. Let's take the time. And again, in the listing of questions, I offered to come in and work with your staff to try to suss some of this information out, and I'm willing to do that again. You know, I can come in a day a week and just spend the time working with your staff to pull some of this information together, or sit in on meetings, or do whatever it takes. I just think I want some of this trend analysis information. I thought the package you sent us, that we sent into the School Building Association, is really good, because it's got projections there that I think are really different than what our actual numbers are. So let's look at that. You know, it's not the worst problem in the world to have lots of kids wanting to come to your schools. You know, and we free up space, we then begin to have a conversation. We're generating significantly less than half of the choice revenue that we were when I got here. You know, and it's been years since maybe choice isn't the best idea, but suddenly to have some additional space to bring some kids in enriches
Or
our school
international
system.
students.
Or international. So let's have the conversation now before we walk away from this asset. And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to make this pitch about it, and that we're going to do it. And whatever I can do to help, I'm happy to do.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Ronan. Any other comment? I'm feeling good. Superintendent's report.
Okay. I want to pass around, for those of you who haven't seen them, these are two photographs of the Knockmolin auditorium that Beth Rossi took, that you just really need to take a look. You can definitely see the improvements that have been made there.
Seen those. I think the firehouse is gonna be upset.
It's,
No, they're gonna come,
We're going to partner with them.
we're gonna partner with them.
There you
because
go.
Because they can't fit large performances there.
Yeah,
That is beautiful.
it was very painful to me to watch my friends at the firehouse go down to the Governor Dummer Academy, because they had an auditorium there that they could put that had more seats than they had when we had these two sitting here. So I'm all in favor of those conversations, I think.
let me give you an update on sports. Our boys cross-country has been undefeated for 4 years and Cape Ann League champions. The captains are Nick Carlio and Mark Landergan. Don Henninger was Coach of the Year. Team moves on to compete for the Eastern Mass and state titles. Nick was running in New York later in the month for the elite nationally ranked high school cross-country runners. The girls cross-country won the Kinney division of the Cape Ann League, which is the large schools. The captains there are Lily Egan and Rachel Haley. And they are competing the next weekend. Field hockey qualified again for the tournament. They won their first round versus Wilmington, but they then lost to Watertown High School, the #1 ranked school in the state.
No shame in
4-0,
that.
no. Friday afternoon. Captains are Ashley Hodge, Renee Vardabedian, Marie Caroline, and Megan Stanton. And defending Division III state champions girls soccer will play this Wednesday at 2 p.m. Cherry Hill Field versus the winner of the North Reading and Greater Lawrence contest. And captains are Lauren Bean, Delaney Bartle, Abby Bresnahan, and Isabella Palmer. So, the latest news.
I find it wonderful and mysterious and very curious that a teacher that retired 4 years ago keeps getting named Coach of the Year. I just think that's great. Don Henninger is just tremendous job with those kids.
I also want to let you know that Mike Perrin and I will be attending the Real World Design Awards ceremony at Hanscom Field this Friday. I'm looking forward to that. I also want to tell you that tomorrow was to be the day that students were leaving on, to go to Camp Kiev, but I'd like to read you what went out to parents today. Dear sixth grade parents, I am very sorry to have to relay the news to you that the staff at Camp Kiev has canceled our trip this week. They had a lot of snow and wind in Maine over the weekend and expected to be without power for several days. They called a little while ago, that was this morning, and are unable to get buses in or food trucks into the facilities. The Kiev leadership experience is one that we value on so many levels for our sixth graders. And this is a message from Beth Rossi. I have been on the phone with Kiev this morning trying to find the right balance for a group of kids that are excited about this venture this week and also find a way to give them an overnight experience as well. With that said, the Kiev staff will stay in this area and provide us with many activities this week here at Knock, beginning on Wednesday. They will even bring their climbing wall for us to set up outside. We are also negotiating an overnight experience for 3 days and 2 nights in the spring on March 31st, April 1st, and 2nd. We are looking at the MCAS schedule and can maneuver around the dates and schedule grade 6 before they go. This change also means that you will have a child at home tomorrow to prepare for, since it is a professional development day in our district. Although disappointing, I feel that we have a decent plan in place and will actually receive more for the money we have paid. Please know that we will talk with the students at the end of the day, today before they leave. I will keep you updated as plans with Kiev are finalized.
That's too bad.
Let me just tell you about some happenings in our schools.
Can I just say, the Real World Design Award, are we getting an award, or is that can't be let out of the bag yet?
I think
Can't
that
be.
I think that I was invited because I was interested in going,
Okay,
so.
okay.
We had a wonderful kindergarten to 3 Halloween parade last Friday.
I saw the pictures.
And our preschool and kindergarten kids also had their annual PTO-sponsored Boo Bash. We have a before-school athletics program that is running for children in grades K to 3, and it's being run on Mondays and Wednesdays by parent Kim Patrick, and it's been highly successful. Teachers are attending a number of professional development workshops and conferences this year, including, and this is just all Bresnahan, social thinking, MKEA training, writing, and Pam Jameson presented at the MassQ conference in October. The second Invite a Parent to Lunch Day is going to be held on Wednesday for pre-K and K students, as well as for 1 through 3 students, for the reservations that we were unable to accommodate due to the overwhelming response earlier in the month.
Wow.
The Veterans Day ceremony at Bresnahan is scheduled for Friday morning. And Clipper the Sea Dog was recently voted to be the school mascot at Bresnahan.
Oh! Clipper the sea dog.
It was between Clipper and a whale, and Clipper was a little bit cuter, I think, than the whale was. So.
Can I just add one piece to
Yes.
Bresnahan? That the PTA was really scrambled because some of the parents who volunteered to do tours of the school for the community forgot that their children would be home. But that being said, they were able to arrange enough members to be there from 11 to 1 tomorrow and 4 to 6 to be able to give members of the community who haven't had a chance yet to
Nice.
see the Bresnahan School to take a walk through. And it's up on the city website also, that information.
Excellent.
So
Before-
you could go vote and get a tour.
Correct.
Okay.
Or you could vote someplace else and
And
then
then
go
go.
over and get a tour.
Could you vote someplace else, come over to the Bres vote, and then get a tour?
That I don't think so, but please do vote.
Just thought I'd ask.
Susan, before you go on to another school, can you talk a little bit about the Fill the Bucket program at the Bres?
That's ongoing. and-
Right, but they had a big opening last week, didn't they? People came in, the PTA provided someone to come in and do that program?
I don't think I'm not aware of it.
I thought
if
it
they
was
did.
on Facebook maybe, or the PTO put it
Maybe
out,
I haven't.
okay, okay.
I want to tell you about a new program that's starting at Knock, and it's called Knock Buddies. It's a group of students who come together regularly for social activities, strengthening our middle school community by embracing individuality and creating one-to-one friendships. Lunches are held every other week by grade level. And once a month, these students get together for an after-school activity that they all enjoy and encompass students from grades 6 to 8. This program will also prepare the middle school students to engage in Best Buddies at the high school. So they had a phenomenal response. And they also have started an art club that meets on Mondays after school at the NOC. I wanted to tell you that it's been a busy time at central office, particularly for both Angela and for Nancy Lysick in closing out fiscal year 14, the EPIM state reporting, fingerprinting, preparing for the civil rights report. And Angela, if you would just take a minute and talk a little bit about Newburyport University.
Sure. Well, tomorrow is Newburyport University for our professional day, and the we're offering 29 different workshops, and the teachers have been busy registering for the workshops they'd like to participate in tomorrow. We do have a theme for the day, and it's around assessment and integration of technology. So the majority of the workshops focus around that theme, and we're going to kick off the day with a speaker who lives locally here in town. His name is Don Arnauds, and he's going to speak about positive psychology and his Exuberance Project, which is all about attitude. And he's going to kick off our day to set the tone for the day for the professional development. So we're very excited. We have many presenters that are teachers in the district that really wanted to share something, an expertise that they've developed or things that they've learned with their colleagues. And we also have many professional development providers coming in to work with us. We've got a gentleman coming from South Carolina to work with us around Baseline Edge, one of our new platforms that we're using. We have Jennifer Unger coming back, who was our data specialist that trained all of our data teams, who's now here to work with our teachers around how to use the data around student growth measures. We've got somebody coming in to teach us about the new technology that's in our auditorium for all of the educators that will be using that. So we just have a wide variety of things going on, and we're hoping for a great day, and I hope that the teachers will get a lot out of it.
That's great.
At Mullen had Jim Jordan come in and do an anti-bullying assembly in October. Currently, the artists from Mexico are presenting to fourth graders, they did that today, regarding culture and creation of their specific art form, and this year it's ceramics. They are beginning implementation of the Think SRSD, help me with that acronym.
I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to help you right this second. Let me think about it.
It's in 2 fifth grade classes. All staff are going to be trained in December, continuing to address, that's another line, but all staff will be trained in December. And Mullen teachers are offering their after-school sessions for academics based on student need in class, math, or ELA. And her last line here is, and we are continuing to address construction-related concerns. So, that's ongoing. And let me just say, I had an opportunity, I did some walkthroughs with Mike Parent on Friday. And just a couple of things. I was amazed at the number of seniors who were dressed for Halloween. There were some very, very creative costumes here at the high school, I will tell you that. I think that there were a number of kids who tried to involve scooters and rollerblades with their costumes, but there were many kids who were dressed and who were having a good time. And I will tell you that walking into classrooms, seeing kids like that, but seeing them really engaged, I mean, is a testament to their maturity, that they can have fun with it, for a short period of time, but then can get down to business. So I was very impressed with the classes. I had an opportunity to be in physics class, an English class, and it was just, it's really been a treat for me to this early in the year be out and about in classes and actually I'm having educational conversations. So that's been delightful to see. So, and it's only going to increase, so I'm really excited about that.
Self-regulated strategy development,
Thank you.
SRS.
I'm not
Is
sure
there
what that-
construction here?
Not in the reconstruction.
Wasn't supposed to be.
It's coming from the tower, right?
Oh, no.
I think that's it for my report.
Great. We're gonna move on to our next item on the agenda, subcommittee reports. I would just like to say that the Joint Ed was supposed to meet today. They did not meet, but the school committee and the city council, as per our new charter, is meeting on Wednesday, November 12th at 6:15. The NEF dedication night at the Bresnahan School is Wednesday, November 19th at 6 p.m. And the school committee will be having our second topic forum on Monday, December 1st from 6:30 to 8 p.m. And the topic will be technology and its use in our classrooms. So we're already working on that. Mr. Cole, Finance?
Next meeting is November 13th. We reported on the last one at the last school committee meeting.
Thank you. Policy, Mr. Menon, we know you're busy over there.
Yeah, policy met on October 30th. It was Audrey and I met, and we had Acting Mayor Susan Vaccaro join us and Acting Superintendent Donna Holliday join us at different times of the meeting. Essentially, it was an opportunity we talked about the basketball situation, but we also had some wide-ranging conversations. I shared information having to do with the fingerprint policy. I spoke briefly with Nancy Lysick. Nancy's had at that point processed over 50 fingerprint requests from parents. There had been 2 requests that she had received so far to consider whether or not fingerprints that are already on file somewhere else could be used. And we don't really have a good answer to that. Part of the problem, as Nancy pointed out, is that the state has been very specific about what they're asking of employees and very unspecific about what they're asking of volunteers. So we're still trying to find out. Nancy told me that she handed me a sheet, because I was one of the 2 requests to use existing fingerprints, something called a suitability determination. But as I looked at the sheet and Nancy left the room to go back to work, I said to myself, suitability for what? So I don't understand actually what the document is. She suggested I fill it out and provide it with the police department. Whether that, to the police department who have my fingerprints on file because of the license to carry, I'm still not sure how we're using that or what that, if that's, so we still don't have information on that. We're still waiting to hear back from the superintendent and a conversation about hardship. And then some other questions I think that we want to talk about around a policy. One of them has to do with getting some clarification around how long the district is going to keep criminal activity reports for non-employees around. And that was a question that was raised in the community. That the way the policy is written, it's extraordinarily ambiguous, that essentially you can hang on to these reports until you don't need them anymore, but you need to then destroy them once you don't need them anymore. But it's very unclear whether in the case of an employee, you're not needing them anymore means that they no longer work for you. And it's even more vague about volunteers. So there is still some more drilling down I think we need to do so that the community can have a level of comfort about it. So we need to continue that conversation. Audrey and I also had a conversation with Acting Superintendent Holliday around facility use, and we realized that there may be some benefit to aligning some of our policies around facility use with the city's other facilities that they lease out, City Hall being one of them, that it might be worth having a conversation about that. We also realized as we were looking over, and I mentioned this earlier, as we were looking over sort of our criteria for who can come to us and say we want to use a facility, that they were written 10 years ago, and we may not cover all the bases of people who are approaching us. And one of the things we certainly aren't covering are the ways in which our facilities are being used. They're being used now in ways that they weren't used 10 years ago, and When we were renting facilities for road race, it meant setting up porta-sands. Now it's setting up a tent city where everybody is showing their, wares and stuff like that. That does a lot more damage than a bunch of porta-sands does. But yet we haven't changed our structure for looking at how we're taking in money around that. And we also realize that we're not really sure that the pennies that are coming in are actually being used, are actually in turn going back to the schools, A, and B, going back in to help some of that being helped to take care of the actual space that's being rented. So in light of the fact that we still have a great deal of conversation and some more research to do around this, that was when we broke off the conversation about using the basketball. We just didn't want to wait until we've got all this stuff nailed down. So, the mayor had alluded to some other ways in which other groups in the community we might collaborate with on using our space. So there's a lot of kind of really interesting things, but we still don't have, we don't have a policy yet simply because all of this stuff we need to really, really think through. So we will continue, we'll set up a meeting for the next 2 weeks, and we'll continue our conversation on this and report out. I don't know if there was, either of you were stepped into the meetings at different times. I don't know if.
I would just like to make sure that this, because it involves oftentimes road races, they start at the schools, use city streets, use other city services. So I think that obviously there's certain pieces that make sense for the policy subcommittee to continue to work on, but at our joint meeting, I think it would be really nice to be able to put an ad hoc group together representing city councilors and school committee members that can kind of put together a draft of what makes sense for when policies touch each other.
Yeah.
Or
I
use
agree.
touches each other, and that we should have consistent policies, because I think we are not reaping the benefits of what we should be for some of these organizations that are making a tremendous amount of money using our facilities, and we get nothing for it, or very little.
Yep. No, I thought that was a really good idea. Audrey and I both did. So we look forward to seeing that on the agenda as a conversation item as well for that meeting.
Thank you.
Audrey, is there anything else that I missed? Okay. Good.
Thank you.
Mike, curriculum instruction and accountability?
So we had our first meeting of the school year on October 21st, and we started the meeting by talking about the Common Core Forum that was held the night before, and I think there's certainly a desire among the members of the committee to continue to support additional forums with the public on curriculum topics and ways that we can engage the rest of the community and educate the rest of the community in terms of what's going on in Newburyport and what direction we should go in for some of those topics. And then we also we spent the rest of the meeting talking about different areas of focus and areas where we felt the committee should spend its time and its efforts in terms of the rest of the year. So we outlined 4 areas specifically and potentially others that may come up at the next meeting. So the 4 areas are serving as a liaison with the administration on budgetary curriculum-related priorities in an effort to try to aid that aspect of the budgeting process and get that kicked off sooner. So acting as a liaison between the rest of the school committee and the administration in terms of curriculum-related priorities. The second one was around special education. The third one was around technology and technology integration in the curriculum. And the fourth area was assisting sort of generally with strategic plan development. And I think all 4 of those areas fit pretty neatly into the district goals. So I think the work that we need to do and the work that I'm really hoping that we can do at the next meeting, which is coming up 2 weeks from tomorrow, is to put those into specific, measurable, SMART goals, and I think that fits in very well with the conversation that we had earlier around the self-evaluation. So I think the agenda for the next meeting will be to talk about the specific goals and things that we want to accomplish as a committee, and then we would bring those back to the rest of the subcommittee
thank you. And I forgot to mention one other thing, and the superintendent did as well, but I just want to give a shout out to the NEF. Their annual auction is November 15th. It's at Nickerson Hall on Harris Street, and it is the biggest fundraiser that the NEF has for the schools every year. Right now, if you sign into the Education Foundation website, there is a registration form for online bidding. And you can also sign up to go to the auction, where there will be both silent bidding and live bidding. It's a wonderful night, so I encourage anyone to come out and join us, and all of it goes to the schools, so it's just a great night. And Susan, you had
yeah.
some,
I forgot to mention that this coming Thursday night, I have invited all of the school councils to come and to meet with me, and we're having a joint meeting to sort of outline the rest of the year, and I wanted an opportunity to be able to meet with all the school councils and talk about our future work for this year.
great, that's great.
And I'm
Okay.
feeding them first.
Feed them and they will come.
Yes.
Is there anything else? Could I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All carries unanimously.